Hi, my name is Jim Fry. I'm Vice President of Research at Enterprise Management Associates. Welcome back to this final edition of the Application-Driven Network Performance Management series. Up to this point, we've talked about what ANPM is, what are the key aspects and attributes and benefits. We did some deep dives on what we mean by network flow analysis and how you construct an ANPM solution. And we looked at some of the detailed special needs of applying these approaches to unified communications. Today we're going to wrap up and we're going to look ahead a little bit at what's changing in the ANPM landscape. So some of the major industry trends that are having an impact on ANPM are the ones that we've all heard of. Things like cloud, for instance. Cloud is, whether it's internal or external, private or public, cloud is based on virtualization technology, and these create visibility barriers. So there's a challenge that must be met, which is to how to reestablish the visibility that we need and that we know works really well in the rest of the traditional networks when we're dealing with virtualized environments and or putting workloads and things that you would like to monitor into remotely hosted locations where you don't have the ability to draw packets. That's one of the big challenges. There's a lot of adaptations taking place by putting instrumentation in place that's virtual in nature. It's all software-based. These are good alternatives. There's other challenges around getting a complete picture, but this is one of the challenge areas. Another is SDN, software-defined networking. This is relatively new, but it certainly changes the behavior and paths that are going to be taken through a network. And so a big piece of ANPM is being able to keep up with applications and traffic regardless of where they happen to be. And SDN represents sort of a superset of the challenges around cloud, which means that the path and location of workloads and of endpoints may be moving at any point in time. So this will be an interesting challenge for ANPM, is to keep up and maintain that application and end user viewpoint regardless of where the workloads themselves happen to move. There's a few others, of course. Security is actually an interesting challenge because a lot of the data going across our networks increasingly is encrypted. And while ANPM solutions can still add a lot of value in understanding the source and destination addresses and possibly at least the protocol level being used, the port level being used for an application, it becomes less useful in decoding and replaying actual session traffic. That doesn't necessarily change the picture. In most cases, you still get value, but you won't be able to do the forensic replay that you were able to do before without tying more directly into security systems and getting the ability to selectively decrypt traffic if you need to for troubleshooting purposes. And lastly, I'll mention one other big trend, which is big data. Big data is related to ANPM in the way that these systems, ANPM systems, throw off a lot of data. The data they generate is big in some ways. But more importantly and more interesting, I think, is that the data that you draw out of ANPM is now being fed into big data repositories. So that big data analytics engines can be run against operational data coming from the network viewpoint and ANPM data in parallel with other measures. And this is throwing off some really interesting value points around more detailed analysis, better grip on the relationships between different aspects of the infrastructure and on the relationships between IT efficiency and the business as a whole. So ANPM practices and technologies need to shift to keep up with these changes, and they're doing so in a number of ways. Some of it ties back to the messages that I talked about earlier, which is shifting away from a pure network-centric viewpoint into, through ANPM, application awareness. This helps networking teams change their focal point and to focus on those things that are most important, and by the way, around which all other aspects of IT are being aligned. ANPM holds the key to that. Another adaptation that's needed is, for those tools that are going to do packet-based monitoring, you still need this. It's still very valuable in certain use cases. You've got to keep up with growing network speeds. Networks are growing fast. 10 gig backbones are going to 40 gig, and we're starting to see 100 gig deployments. So packet-based monitoring needs to try to keep pace. There's also a growing richness of data that's available through flow records, things like NetFlow and IPFix. We're now seeing the addition of response time measurements and more discrete measures of individual application activity as part of flow records. So instead of just being a general high-level snapshot of what's going on, you can see increasing levels of details provided through flow records. This adds some benefits because in places where packet-based monitoring won't scale or is not accessible, flow records might be your best bet. And so taking advantage of these new capabilities within flow records will become increasingly important. Another change, based on a trend we just mentioned, SDN, is throwing off some additional opportunities. SDN is marked in many ways by APIs everywhere. All of the infrastructure equipment now has APIs. Control systems, controllers will have APIs. This is new sources of data, and in some cases it means you've got new application-oriented data that you can draw into systems. And this might be really helpful in understanding behavior and the changes in behavior of software-based networking. Examples there include the OpenFlow specs do include some ability to monitor and draw metrics directly out of the APIs that are available. Cisco's ACI solution is going to have a lot of details around specific application demands and application policies. That's going to be very helpful. Even other intelligent data sources that already exist within networking equipment, for example, the AVC feature set, also within Cisco Gear, provides another deep, rich set of details that can be drawn in that will actually be independent of the changes we see in the networking technologies themselves. So where do we start with this? We've talked a lot about what ANPM is, about the different aspects. What are the things you need to start with first? Certainly the first step is to look for application awareness data sources that are already available to you today. Start gathering them and start using them. Look for NetFlow records. Deploy some packet-based monitoring where it makes sense. Take advantage of embedded synthetic tests like IPSLA if that's available to you. That data is there, gather it and leverage it. But where do you start in terms of focusing the next step? Well, look for the most important applications. Look for the ones that are critical to your organization and make sure you're characterizing activity around those first. Unified Communications is a great place to start too, and a lot of folks do. Because if you don't have your network clean and have good visibility into what's going on in the network, your chances of success with UC are significantly lower. So if you do establish the policies and the monitoring to make sure that you understand what's going on in the network around UC, you're in a pretty good position to do the rest of application-oriented monitoring. And lastly, and most importantly, once you get this sort of data in hand, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it with the rest of the organization, either through reports, through alerts that you can forward to other systems, through consoles that you put up. Share this data. It's very, very relevant to the higher level objectives of the organization and is going to be key as part of integrated IT operations going forward. So thank you for joining us for this series on application-driven network performance management. Hopefully it's been very instructive. We started out in session 1 talking about what we mean by ANPM. Session 2, we dove into the core capabilities and some of the benefits of ANPM. Session 3, we took a deeper dive into what we mean by network flows and the traditional approaches to ANPM from a technology and tools perspective. And we also talked about what CA Technologies is doing in that area. In session 4, we did another deep dive, but this time on unified communications monitoring, looking at the special aspects and needs around that. And again, also looked at what CA Technologies is doing. And then we wrapped the session up with a look ahead at what impacts and changes are coming to ANPM.